Andrew Harkin had always considered himself a rational man, a planner, a strategist. It was that same mindset that had helped him build his business empire from the ground up, turning a struggling tech startup into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse. But when it came to his marriage, he'd always chosen love over logic. Until tonight. He sat on the couch, laptop resting on his thighs, eyes scanning through his emails when he heard the soft clicking of heels against the hardwood floor. Victoria, his wife of 7 years, stepped into the living room with an air of casual confidence, her slim frame wrapped in a tight black dress, one he hadn't seen in years. "Hey," she said nonchalantly, tucking a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Andrew barely looked up. "Hey." She hesitated for a moment before she stepped closer, her perfume, a scent he once loved, filling the air. "So, I wanted to talk to you about something." There was something in her tone, a forced lightness. He finally looked at her, meeting her gaze. "Go on." Victoria shifted her weight, smoothing her dress down with her manicured fingers. "This Friday, I'm going on a date with a colleague." Silence. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. Andrew felt his body tense, a cold wave washing over him. His fingers twitched against the keyboard, his jaw tightening. A date. With a colleague. Not a joke. Not a slip of the tongue. Just a plain, casual confession. She wasn't asking. She was telling him. And the way she said it, like she was discussing weekend plans, was what truly made his blood boil. She had expected something from him. Yelling, maybe. Accusations. Pleading. Instead, he let out a low chuckle. Victoria frowned slightly, shifting again as if thrown off by his reaction. "Did you hear what I said?" Andrew shut his laptop with a soft click, stretching his arms as he stood up. He was taller than her, and as he stepped forward, he saw the way her eyes flickered with the smallest hint of uncertainty. He smiled. "Great idea." Victoria blinked. "What?" "I said great idea." He let the words settle, enjoying the way she suddenly looked off balance. "Actually, I've been eyeing a girl at the gym. Always thought she was attractive. Maybe I'll ask her out. You don't mind, do you?" He turned away, tossing the words over his shoulder as if he couldn't care less. Victoria's confidence cracked. No, of course not," she stammered, but her voice wavered. Interesting. She expected him to break, to beg, to fight for her. But what she wasn't expecting was for him to be perfectly fine with it. That meant only one thing. This wasn't a test. It wasn't a game. She was doing this because she thought he was weak, that he was too spineless to fight back. And that was her biggest mistake. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table and walked toward the hallway, leaving her standing there. He could feel her eyes burning into his back, waiting for him to turn around, to react. But he didn't. He had already made up his mind. She wanted war. She was going to get it. And when he was done, she would regret ever underestimating him. Andrew sat in his home office, the dim glow of his monitor illuminating his face. The moment Victoria had dropped her little bombshell about her date, something inside him had shifted. The shock had been temporary, the anger manageable, but the cold, calculated part of his mind had already started working. He wasn't a fool. This wasn't the beginning of her betrayal. It was merely the moment she felt comfortable enough to tell him about it, which meant it had been going on for much longer. And if there was one thing Andrew hated, it was being made a fool of. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing in the name of an old contact, Easton Reynolds, private investigator. Easton wasn't just some run-of-the-mill detective. He was a professional at exposing secrets, especially when it came to infidelity cases. Andrew had helped Easton out of a legal mess years ago, so he owed him a favor. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and dialed. The call barely rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Hey, buddy. Been a while. You finally decided to use that favor." Andrew leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I need you to track my wife." A brief pause, then a low chuckle. "Damn, didn't see that coming." "You sure?" "Dead sure." "You want the usual?" "Photos, messages, locations." "I want everything," Andrew said coldly. "I want to know who, where, when, and for how long. I want text messages, emails, hotel records, the works." Easton let out a whistle. "This one's personal." Andrew's grip tightened around his phone. It is. Consider it done. Give me a few days. Andrew ended the call, his mind already racing ahead. Victoria thought she was in control. She thought she could step all over him, make a mockery of their marriage, and that he would accept it. But by the time he was done, she would be the one begging. 3 days later, Andrew sat in the back booth of a small cafe, nursing a black coffee when Easton slid into the seat across from him. The investigator tossed a thick brown envelope onto the table. "You might want to brace yourself," Easton said, rubbing his jaw. "It's worse than you think." Andrew didn't hesitate. He picked up the envelope and flipped it open. Inside were printed screenshots, hundreds of them, text messages, emails, explicit photos. Victoria's words jumped out at him, each line like a knife carving into his chest. "I can't stop thinking about you, Jason. Last night was amazing. I swear, my husband is so clueless. He still thinks I love him. It's pathetic. He's just a safety net. But you make me feel alive." Andrew's fingers curled around the paper so tightly it nearly tore. And then there was Jason. The guy was younger, a cocky, arrogant prick who worked at Victoria's office. Andrew recognized him from a few work events. Jason Pierce, a mid-level sales rep with an overinflated ego and a shit-eating grin. He flipped through the photos Easton had included. Victoria and Jason at a hotel, locked in a passionate embrace. Another of them in a car, lips pressed together. And the worst, Victoria in their bed, with Jason lying next to her, smirking at the camera like he had won. Andrew's pulse pounded. This wasn't just an affair. It was a mockery. And then, at the very bottom of the pile, he found a screenshot of a message, one from Jason to a friend. "Dude, this guy's a fucking loser. She's got him wrapped around her little finger. If he ever found out, he'd probably cry himself to sleep. Victoria says he's just a paycheck to her. She's just waiting for the right time to dump him. I almost feel bad for the guy. Almost." Andrew's jaw clenched so hard it ached. That was it. That was fucking it. He wasn't just going to expose them. He wasn't just going to divorce her. No, he was going to ruin them. Easton leaned back, watching Andrew with a careful expression. "So what's the plan?" Andrew's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smirk. "I'm going to let her dig her own grave." Easton raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Andrew placed the photos and messages back into the envelope, tapping it against the table. "She thinks I'm weak. She thinks she can control this narrative. So, I'm going to act like nothing's wrong. And then," Andrew's smirk widened, "and then, I'll strike when she least expects it." He stood up, tucking the envelope under his arm. His heart was pounding, but it wasn't from sadness anymore. It wasn't from pain. It was from the thrill of the game. Because now, the real fun was about to begin. Andrew Harkin wasn't a man who believed in emotional outbursts. He had learned early in life that true power came not from reacting, but from controlling the narrative. And now, standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks, he reminded himself of that lesson. He had every reason to explode, to demand answers, to throw Victoria out of the house. But what would that accomplish? Nothing. She would cry. She would lie. She would gaslight him into thinking he was overreacting. No, Victoria wouldn't get that satisfaction. She would think she was winning, until the moment she realized he had taken everything from her. And so, he walked out of the bedroom like nothing was wrong. Victoria was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone, probably texting Jason, sending him flirty little messages. Andrew suppressed the rage bubbling in his chest and forced a pleasant smile. "Morning, babe," he said, pressing a light kiss to the side of her head. Victoria stiffened for just a second before flashing him her usual bright, fake smile. "Morning. You're in a good mood today." "Of course," he said, pouring himself coffee. "I just have a lot to look forward to." And he did. Victoria thought she was playing him, but she had no idea that he was about to play her. The first step was financial. Andrew was a smart man. His wealth, assets, and business holdings weren't easily accessible. But his biggest mistake had been trusting Victoria with joint accounts. Not anymore. That morning, he made a few calls to his financial advisor. Quietly, discreetly, he began shifting funds into an account under his name only. He changed passwords, updated security questions, and ensured that Victoria wouldn't see a dime when this was over. The next step? The legal battle. Andrew knew divorce could be a messy war, and he wanted to be armed with the best ammunition possible. He dialed his lawyer, John Peterson, a ruthless shark who had a reputation for annihilating spouses in court. John picked up on the second ring. Andrew, what can I do for you? Andrew leaned back in his chair. I need a divorce attorney, and I need you to make it brutal. There was a pause before John chuckled. I assume this is about Victoria? Andrew smirked. I assume you already know why. I do, John confirmed. I have a team gathering every scrap of evidence, messages, bank transactions, and phone records. When we're done, she won't even have the clothes on her back. That's what I like to hear, Andrew said smoothly. Make sure the house stays under my name. She gets nothing. Consider it done, John assured. When do you want to serve the papers? Not yet, Andrew said, his smirk growing. Let her think everything is fine. I want her comfortable, then we strike. John laughed. Cold. I love it. Andrew hung up, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Victoria had no idea that the very foundation beneath her feet was crumbling. And he wasn't done yet. There was something poetic about it all. Victoria had spent months sneaking around behind his back, betraying him with her pathetic excuse of a lover. Now, Andrew would do the same, except he wouldn't sneak. He wouldn't hide. He would enjoy himself, openly and unapologetically. And Lucia was the perfect person for it. She was a trainer at his gym, a stunning brunette with piercing green eyes, toned curves, and an effortless confidence that made heads turn. She had always flirted with him, always given him just enough attention to let him know she was interested. Before, Andrew had been faithful. Now, he didn't know Victoria a damn thing. That afternoon, after a grueling workout, he found Lucia at the front desk, chatting with another trainer. She spotted him and gave a dazzling smile. Mr. Harkin, she teased. Back for another session already? Andrew leaned against the counter, flashing her an easy smirk. Call me Andrew. And yeah, I figured I'd come back for another kind of workout. Lucia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh, and what kind is that? He took a moment to admire her before replying. One that involves dinner. With you. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Well, if I didn't know any better, I'd say you're flirting with me, Andrew. Good, he said smoothly. Because I am. Lucia tapped a finger on the counter, pretending to consider. You know what? I'd love to. Andrew chuckled. Good choice. Friday at 7. I'll be waiting, she said, biting her lips slightly. As he walked out of the gym, Andrew felt something he hadn't felt in months. Excitement. Victoria thought she was in control of this game, but she was about to learn. Andrew Harkin never lost. Friday arrived, and Andrew made sure to play the perfect husband before heading out. Victoria was getting ready for her date, thinking she had fooled him. She stepped into the living room in a sleek red dress, her eyes twinkling with the thrill of deception. You don't mind me going out, do you? She asked coyly, testing the waters. Andrew sipped his whiskey, giving her a lazy smile. Of course not. In fact, he stood up, adjusting his blazer. I have a date, too. Victoria froze. The color drained slightly from her face. What? Andrew smirked. What's wrong, babe? You didn't think you were the only one who gets to have fun, did you? She forced a laugh. No, I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. He walked past her, stopping just long enough to whisper, Well, sweetheart, you gave me the idea. I should be thanking you. And with that, he left. As he drove toward the restaurant to meet Lucia, he could only imagine the thoughts racing through Victoria's head. Doubt, fear, maybe even jealousy. And that was exactly what he wanted. Because this wasn't just about cheating back. This was about breaking Victoria's mind before he destroyed her life. And the best part? She still had no idea what was coming. Andrew Harkin had always believed in poetic justice. So, when it came time to execute the perfect revenge, there was no better occasion than his anniversary with Victoria. For 7 years, they had celebrated the date with expensive dinners, luxurious vacations, and heartfelt gifts. Victoria had always made a show of it, parading their perfect marriage in front of friends and family. This year would be different. Because this year, Andrew wasn't celebrating their marriage. He was burying it. The plan was flawless. Andrew rented out an upscale private dining hall in one of the most exclusive restaurants in town, the Grand Royale, a place where high-profile businessmen, celebrities, and politicians often dined. The kind of place where appearances mattered. He sent out invitations to all of Victoria's closest friends, family members, and co-workers, including Jason. He made sure Jason thought it was his idea. A few days before the event, he casually dropped a hint to Victoria about wanting to do something special. As expected, she relayed the message to Jason, who suggested they both attend and subtly rub the affair in Andrew's face. Jason thought he was a mastermind. In reality, he was walking straight into Andrew's trap. The evening arrived, and Andrew played the role of the perfect host. He stood at the entrance of the lavish dining hall, greeting guests with a charming smile and firm handshakes. The air smelled of fine wine and fresh roses, the lighting dim and elegant, casting a golden glow over the tables draped in silk. Victoria arrived late, as expected, making an entrance in a shimmering silver dress, her arm casually brushing against Jason's. Andrew saw it. So did everyone else. The whispers had already started. Andrew smirked. Good. He pulled Victoria into a brief hug, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, "Enjoy tonight, sweetheart. It'll be unforgettable." Victoria pulled back, looking momentarily puzzled. But then Jason slid in beside her, smirking like the arrogant bastard he was, and she let it go. Andrew motioned for everyone to take their seats. Then he took the floor. "First of all," Andrew began, raising a glass of champagne, "I want to thank each and every one of you for coming tonight. This is a very special occasion." Victoria beamed, clearly thinking this was some grand gesture of love. Jason chuckled, leaning back in a chair like a man who thought he had already won. "But before we toast," Andrew continued, "I have a little surprise." He gestured toward the large screen that had been set up at the back of the room. A click. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. And then the truth played out in high definition. Text messages, photos, videos, everything. Victoria's flirty messages to Jason. Her calling Andrew pathetic and clueless. Jason's cocky responses, bragging about sleeping with a married woman. The hotel receipts, the phone logs, the explicit selfies. The room went dead silent. Gasps echoed through the hall. Victoria turned ghostly white, her eyes locked on the screen as her deepest, most shameful secrets were exposed in front of everyone who mattered in her life. Jason's smirk evaporated, his face draining of color as he saw his own words displayed for all to see. "Dude, this guy's a fucking loser. She's just using him for his money. Once she leaves him, she's all mine. Can't wait to rub it in his face. I almost feel bad for him. Almost." Andrew let the words hang in the air. Then, he turned to Victoria, his voice calm but deadly. "Happy anniversary, babe." Victoria shot up from her seat, panic flooding her features. Andrew, I can't explain," Andrew chuckled, shaking his head. "No need." He gestured to the horrified crowd. "I think the evidence speaks for itself." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake." Jason, ever the cocky bastard, tried to salvage the situation. He scoffed, forcing out a laugh. "Dude, you're overreacting. It's not a big deal, crack." Andrew's fist collided with Jason's jaw so fast, so hard, that the impact rattled the entire table. Jason went down, chair toppling over, blood spilling from his nose as he groaned in pain. The crowd gasped, some stepping back, others murmuring in shock. Andrew rolled his shoulders, shaking out his fist. Been waiting to do that." He turned his gaze back to Victoria, who was sobbing now, hands covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "Andrew," she whispered, "I love you." "Please." Andrew tilted his head, amused. "Love me?" He let out a bitter laugh. "You loved screwing another man while calling me a loser. You loved humiliating me." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Now, I'm returning the favor." Victoria crumbled, sinking into her seat, sobbing uncontrollably. Jason groaned from the floor, tried to push himself up. "You fucking bastard." Andrew leaned down, gripping Jason by the collar. "Let me be clear, Jason. I could ruin your life with one phone call. Your job? Gone. Your career? Over. So if I were you, I'd get up, walk out of here, and never cross my path again. Jason swallowed, eyes darting around the room as he realized the entire audience was against him. With his pride shattered, he wiped the blood from his nose and stumbled out, alone. Victoria reached for Andrew's hand. "Please," she sobbed. "I don't want to lose you." Andrew yanked his hand away. "You already did." And with that, he turned on his heel and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. As he stepped into the cool night air, he exhaled deeply, feeling lighter than he had in years. Tonight wasn't just about revenge. It was about freedom. And for the first time in a long time, Andrew Harkin was free. The morning after Andrew's masterful annihilation of Victoria and Jason, his phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, hundreds of text messages. Victoria. "Andrew, please. Let's talk. I swear I can explain." Victoria. "I made a mistake. I was stupid. But I love you." Victoria. "Don't do this to me. We can fix this. Please just pick up the phone." Andrew read each message with a smirk before deleting them all. No response. He wanted Victoria to stew in her own misery, drowning in panic, realizing just how badly she had fucked up. He was no longer her safety net. He was her executioner. And today, the legal guillotine was coming down. By noon, Andrew was sitting in his divorce attorney's office, sipping a black coffee, reviewing the paperwork that would strip Victoria of everything. John Peterson, his lawyer, grinned as he flipped through the thick stack of documents. "This is brutal, Andrew." "I love it." Andrew chuckled, tapping the table. "I want her to feel every ounce of the betrayal she put me through." John nodded approvingly. "You're making sure she walks away with nothing. Since you had a prenup and all assets were under your name before marriage, she gets zero of your business, the house, or your investments." Andrew smirked. "And the car?" "Gone." John confirmed. "It's in your name. She'll be left with her debt and whatever savings she has left, which, by the way, isn't much." Andrew leaned back, satisfied. Victoria had spent years enjoying the lavish life he had built. Now, she was about to experience the exact opposite. John slid the documents across the table. "Sign here, and we'll have her served by tomorrow morning." Andrew picked up the pen, pressing it against the paper. Then, with one smooth stroke, he signed his name. It was official. Victoria Harkin was about to lose it all. But Andrew wasn't done yet. He still had one more loose end to cut. Jason, that smug, arrogant piece of shit who thought he could mock Andrew, call him a loser, and sleep with his wife without consequences. He was about to learn a painful lesson. Andrew picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Harrison, it's Andrew Harkin. I have some very interesting information about your employee, Jason Walker." A pause. Then, "Andrew, good to hear from you. What's this about?" Andrew smiled darkly. "It's about company ethics. I have undeniable proof that Jason Walker has been engaging in workplace misconduct, specifically sleeping with a married colleague, using company resources to cover up their affair, and even doing so on business trips." A long silence, then a sharp inhale. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Andrew said, forwarding every incriminating screenshot, text, and email to the CEO's inbox. "It's evidence." A soft chime indicated the message was sent. Seconds later, Harrison's voice was ice cold. "Andrew, I appreciate this. Consider Jason Walker terminated. Effective immediately." Andrew smirked. "Pleasure doing business with you." Click. Hours later, Andrew received a delightful update. Jason had been dragged out of his office by security, fired on the spot. His work laptop was confiscated. His access revoked. The arrogant homewrecker had gone from corporate success to unemployed garbage in a matter of minutes. And the best part? Victoria's job was next. Since their affair violated company policies, she was placed under immediate investigation. By the end of the week, she was fired too. Now, Jason and Victoria weren't just jobless. They were fucked. No income, no stability, and a mountain of bills. Andrew could only imagine the panic setting in. Victoria, crying as she realized she couldn't afford her fancy shopping sprees anymore. Jason, panicking as he struggled to pay rent without his cushy salary. Andrew Harkin wasn't just winning. He was watching them drown. That night, Andrew arrived home to find Victoria waiting for him. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup smeared, her hair a tangled mess. She had been crying. A lot. Andrew exhaled, already bored of her. "What do you want, Victoria?" Victoria fell to her knees. "Please," she sobbed. "I have nothing left. I lost my job, my savings are gone, and her voice cracked. "I can't do this without you." Andrew crossed his arms. "You should have thought about that before you spread your leg for Jason." Victoria flinched as if he had slapped her. "I was stupid," she choked out. I don't even know what I was thinking. I thought Jason was better than me." Andrew finished coldly. Victoria whimpered. "I was wrong. You were always the better man. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it." Andrew let out a dry laugh. "Classic." Victoria grabbed his leg, clinging to him. "Please, Andrew. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll stay home, be the perfect wife." Andrew yanked his leg away. "You're not my wife anymore, Victoria. You're nothing to me." Victoria screamed in frustration. "Don't do this. You're ruining me." Andrew leaned in, whispering in her ear. "No, sweetheart. You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure you pay for it." Then he walked past her without a second glance. Victoria crumbled on the floor, sobbing hysterically. Andrew drove to the gym that night, stepping inside with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Lucia was waiting for him at the front desk, her emerald eyes lighting up as she saw him. "Rough day," she teased. Andrew smirked. "More like a day of victories." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "Care to celebrate?" Andrew grabbed her waist, pulling her close. "You have no idea." As he leaned in, capturing her lips in a deep, passionate kiss, he realized something. This was the beginning of something better. A new life. And this time, he was in control. It had been 6 months since Andrew Harkin had burned his old life to the ground. 6 months since he had destroyed Victoria's reputation, wrecked Jason's career, and walked away from his cheating wife without looking back. 6 months of peace, freedom, and success. Andrew was happier than ever. His business was thriving, his mind was clear, and most importantly, he had Lucia. She was everything Victoria wasn't: loyal, kind, passionate. A woman who genuinely supported him, rather than using him for money and status. For the first time in years, Andrew felt alive. But that night, as he stood in his kitchen pouring a glass of bourbon, a knock at the door shattered his tranquility. A hesitant, almost timid knock. His gut twisted. He knew. Even before he reached for the handle, he knew. And when he opened the door, there she was. Victoria. Andrew barely recognized her. She was pale, disheveled, and gaunt. Dark circles framed her sunken eyes, and her once lustrous hair was a tangled mess. But the most noticeable difference? She was pregnant. Visibly. Her stomach was swollen, rounding beneath her oversized coat, proof of her infidelity now impossible to ignore. Andrew's grip on the door tightened. "What the fuck are you doing here?" Victoria's lips trembled. "Andrew, I had nowhere else to go." He stared at her, his jaw clenched. "That sounds like a you problem." She flinched but didn't move. Instead, she lowered her head, shame thick in her voice. "Jason's gone." Andrew raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. And Victoria broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she covered her face with trembling hands. "He left me," she choked out. "As soon as he lost his job and the money ran out, he disappeared. Blocked my number, moved to another city. I have no way to reach him." Andrew laughed, a dark, bitter chuckle. "Wow," he mused. "You mean the guy who slept with another man's wife and mocked her husband wasn't a reliable partner? Who could have seen that coming?" Victoria sobbed harder. "I made a mistake. A huge mistake." "But Andrew, please." Her voice cracked as she placed a hand over her belly. "I can't do this alone." Andrew's expression hardened. "You should have thought about that before you spread your legs for him." She winced as if he had struck her. I know," she sobbed. "I was stupid, but I can't take it back. Please, Andrew, I don't have a job. I don't have money. I have nothing." Andrew tilted his head. "You had everything with me, and you threw it away for a temporary thrill." Victoria clutched the fabric of her coat, her entire body trembling. "I know. and I regret it every single day. Her voice wavered. Then she whispered the words that made Andrew's stomach turn. I need you to raise this baby with me. For a moment, silence filled the air. Then Andrew let out a slow, disbelieving chuckle. You can't be serious. Victoria stepped forward, desperate. You were always the better man. A good husband, a good provider. I know this isn't your child, but I also know you're a better father than Jason could ever be. Andrew clenched his jaw. You expect me to take care of another man's child? After everything you did? Victoria collapsed to her knees. I'm begging you, Andrew, she sobbed. I'll do anything. I'll be the wife I was supposed to be. I'll stay home. I'll be loyal. I'll shut the fuck up. His voice was low, cold. Victoria's words died in her throat. Andrew crouched down, staring her dead in the eyes. Let me make something very clear, he said slowly. You are nothing to me. Your child is nothing to me. And you're suffering? It's exactly what you fucking deserve. Victoria's breath hitched. Andrew, please, he stood back up. Get the fuck off my doorstep. Victoria reached for him, her hands trembling. Just let me in. I don't have anywhere else to go. Andrew stepped back, unmoved, unforgiving. You should have thought about that before you betrayed the only person who ever truly loved you. Then, he shut the door in her face. He heard her muffled sobs, the way her body crumpled against the wood. He waited, and when the crying finally stopped, when the footsteps finally faded into the night, he exhaled and walked away, without a single ounce of regret. Later that night, Andrew lay in bed with Lucia, her body curled against his. She traced lazy circles on his chest, her voice soft. You okay? Andrew thought about it. He had just rejected the woman he had once planned to spend his life with. He had just turned away his cheating wife and her unborn child, leaving them to fend for themselves. Did he feel guilty? Did he feel regret? He turned to Lucia, pressing a soft kiss to her lips before whispering, I've never been better. And he meant it. Victoria's suffering was not his burden. Her child was not his responsibility. And her regret was far too little, far too late. Andrew Harkin stood in his doorway, arms crossed over his chest, staring down at the wreck of a woman he once called his wife. Victoria was barely holding herself together. Her face was blotchy from crying, her lips trembling, her once pristine designer coat now wrinkled and stained. But the most pathetic part? The desperation in her eyes. A silent plea, a last, frantic hope that the man she betrayed, humiliated, and discarded would somehow take her back. Andrew almost felt bad. Almost. Instead, he smirked. Oh, sweetheart, he chuckled, his voice laced with mock sympathy. I'd love to help, but I'm a little busy. Victoria blinked, her breath hitching. Be busy, she echoed, confused. Andrew tilted his head. Yeah, see, the girl from the gym? Lucia. Victoria's shoulders stiffened. Andrew grinned. The final nail in the coffin was coming. We just got engaged. Victoria froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if her brain had short-circuited. She blinked once. Twice. Then, like a glass shattering, she completely broke. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. No, you're lying. Andrew raised an eyebrow. Why would I lie? Victoria's breathing turned shallow, panic flashing across her face. Why you just filed for divorce a few months ago? You're not ready. You can't be ready. Andrew let out a soft laugh, leaning against the doorframe. You don't get to tell me what I'm ready for, Victoria. Victoria stepped forward as if trying to close the distance between them, her hands shaking. Andrew, please, she rasped. You don't love her. Not like you love me. Andrew's smirk widened. Oh, you're so wrong about that, he murmured. Victoria gasped sharply, her hands clutching her coat as if she was physically holding herself together. She's not me, she cried, her voice rising in hysteria. Andrew exhaled slowly, almost as if he was thinking. Then, his next words came like a blade to the heart. Yeah, that's the best part. Victoria staggered back, as if the words had physically hit her. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked completely destroyed. And Andrew? He enjoyed every fucking second of it. Victoria tried one last time. Andrew. She whimpered, her voice cracking. I can change. Andrew's smirk vanished. His expression turned blank. Cold. Empty. Too late. Then, without another word, he grabbed the door and slammed it shut. Hard. Victoria's broken sob echoed through the wood. But Andrew didn't open the door again. Not this time. Not ever. Andrew turned away, his chest rising and falling in deep satisfaction. He had just shut Victoria out of his life permanently. And for the first time in years, he felt weightless. His phone buzzed. A message from Lucia. Lucia. Hey, love, just finished my dress fitting. Can't wait to see you tonight, red heart. Andrew smirked. Victoria was his past. Lucia? She was his future. And he was finally free. Victoria stood frozen on Andrew's doorstep long after the door slammed shut. The cold air bit at her skin, but she barely felt it. Her mind was racing, spiraling, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. Andrew was engaged. He had moved on. He had replaced her with another woman. And the worst part? He looked happy. She had expected him to be cold, maybe even distant, but this was final. She clutched her stomach. The weight of her unborn child felt heavier than ever. Tears blurred her vision as she turned and stumbled away. Victoria's phone was practically dead, but she still managed to pull up Jason's number. She had called it before, dozens of times. Every call went to voicemail. Every text went unanswered. But tonight, she needed him to answer. She pressed the call button, her breath shaky. It rang, and rang, and rang, click. Her heart leapt. Jason. A pause, then a slow, mocking chuckle. Wow, Jason drawled. You're still calling me? That's just sad, babe. Victoria's stomach twisted. Where the hell have you been? She shrieked. You left me. You blocked me. I've been alone for months, Jason. Jason let out a bored sigh, and Victoria's blood turned ice cold. And I'm pregnant with your child. Another pause. Then Jason laughed, full-on, gut-busting laughter. Victoria's hands trembled. You actually thought I'd stick around? He taunted. Jesus, Victoria, you're dumber than I thought. Her breathing turned erratic. You told me you loved me, she whispered. You said you wanted to start a life with me. Jason scoffed. Yeah, well, that was before Andrew ruined my career and made sure I couldn't get another job in this city. Victoria felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her. So that's it? She choked. You're just abandoning your own child? Jason sighed again. Look, I don't know what fantasy you had in your head, but I'm not playing house with you. Victoria's stomach twisted into knots. But, listen, babe, he cut her off. You were fun, but now you're just a fucking mess, and I don't do baggage. Victoria felt sick. Jason, please, click. The call ended. Jason was gone. For good. Victoria collapsed onto a nearby bench, clutching her stomach. For the first time, she realized she was truly, utterly alone. The following weeks were hell. With no job and no support, Victoria found herself desperate for any kind of work. She applied everywhere, from corporate offices to fast food chains, only to face constant rejection. Her old company wouldn't take her back. She had burned too many bridges, made too many enemies. People whispered when they saw her, mocking her behind her back. She cheated on her rich husband and got pregnant by some loser. Now she's begging for work. Victoria felt the stares, heard the whispers, but she had no choice. She needed money, so she swallowed her pride and took a job as a cashier at a dingy grocery store. It was miserable. The hours were long, the pay was barely enough to cover rent, and her boss treated her like garbage. She had gone from being a pampered housewife with luxury handbags to scraping by, barely affording secondhand maternity clothes. Every night, she cried herself to sleep in her tiny, roach-infested apartment. She had nothing left. No husband, no lover, no future. And soon, she'd have a baby she couldn't even afford to feed. One evening, after an exhausting shift, Victoria dragged herself home. She was exhausted, nauseous, and barely holding it together. But just as she reached her building, she heard something that stopped her dead in her tracks. A familiar, warm laugh. Her head snapped up, and there they were, Andrew and Lucia, walking hand in hand, glowing with happiness. Lucia's engagement ring sparkled under the streetlights, and Andrew looked better than ever. stronger, happier, unburdened, the complete opposite of her. And then, as if fate wanted to destroy her further, Andrew's gaze flickered over, locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, painfully, Andrew smirked. It was the same smirk he had given her the night he shut the door in her face. A smirk that said, "You deserve this." Victoria's stomach twisted with shame, anger, and regret. Then Andrew turned back to Lucia, pressing a kiss to her temple. And just like that, he walked away. Victoria stood there, her chest heaving, tears pooling in her eyes. She had lost. She had lost everything, and there was no coming back from it. Andrew Harkin was no longer the man who had sat on that couch months ago, listening to his wife calmly announce her infidelity as if it were nothing. That man had been shattered, a devoted husband who had given his heart to someone who never deserved it. But now he was stronger, smarter, unstoppable. His life had become everything Victoria had foolishly thrown away. And the best part? She got to watch every second of it. Andrew stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the morning sun casting a golden glow over the city skyline. A fresh cup of coffee in one hand, his phone in the other. His business had exploded in success over the last few months. His company had expanded internationally, and he had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal that set him up for generational wealth. But none of it compared to the true highlight of his life. Soft arms wrapped around his waist, a familiar warmth pressing against his back. "Morning, handsome," Lucia's voice purred as she kissed his shoulder. Andrew smirked, setting his coffee down before turning to face her. His fiancée, his soon-to-be wife, looked radiant, her loose curls cascading over her silk robe. She was everything Victoria wasn't. Loyal, loving, devoted. And unlike Victoria, she had never once taken Andrew for granted. "How's our little prince?" Andrew asked, running a gentle hand over her stomach. Lucia beamed, her eyes lighting up, kicking like a future athlete. Andrew let out a chuckle, pure pride swelling in his chest. He was going to be a father, a real father, not to some bastard child that Victoria had expected him to raise after betraying him. No, this child would be his and Lucia's, born from love, not lies. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria was living in a completely different reality. Her apartment was a disaster, a one-bedroom, roach-infested box with leaky pipes and walls so thin she could hear her neighbors arguing every night. Her job at the grocery store was soul-crushing. She spent 10 hours a day on her feet, dealing with rude customers, a sleazy manager, and a paycheck that barely covered food and rent. She had gone from sipping champagne in five-star restaurants to living off instant ramen and gas station sandwiches. And Jason? Nowhere to be found. The last time she had seen him, he was drunk at a bar, flirting with a younger woman, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. When she had confronted him, he had sneered in her face. "Why the fuck would I take care of some kid I never wanted?" he had spat before shoving past her. And that had been it. Jason was gone. Forever. Leaving Victoria alone, with nothing but her mistakes and a child she could barely afford. Victoria's worst nightmare happened on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. She was working the register, exhaustion weighing on her, barely holding herself together. And then they walked in. Andrew and Lucia and their newborn son. Victoria's heart stopped. Andrew was pushing the stroller, his hand resting protectively on Lucia's back. They looked like a picture-perfect family. Victoria felt a sharp, gut-wrenching pain rip through her chest. That was supposed to be her life. Her husband. Her child. Her happily ever after. And yet, there she was, ringing up groceries like a fucking failure, watching the man she had betrayed live the life she had foolishly thrown away. Her hands trembled as she scanned their items. A few cartons of baby formula, organic fruits, a bottle of expensive wine. Her throat tightened. Everything in their cart screamed luxury. Meanwhile, Victoria had been counting quarters just to buy bread. She forced a weak smile. "Hey, Andrew," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Andrew didn't even glance at her. Not once. He continued talking to Lucia, completely ignoring her existence. Victoria felt like she had been slapped. Her face burned with humiliation. She looked at Lucia, desperate for some acknowledgement, some sign that she still mattered. But Lucia? She only looked at Victoria with pity. And somehow, that was even worse. When the total rang up, Andrew casually pulled out a black titanium credit card, the kind reserved for the wealthiest of the wealthy. Victoria's stomach churned. That used to be her money, her life, her world. Now, she couldn't even afford to feed herself properly. Andrew finally looked at her as he took his receipt. For the first time in months, their eyes met, and Victoria felt her soul wither. Because in Andrew's gaze, there was no love, no pain, no regret, just indifference. She had become nothing to him, and that hurt more than anything. As Andrew turned to leave, Lucia gently placed a hand on his arm. "Wait," she murmured, glancing back at Victoria. Then, to Victoria's horror, Lucia pulled out a $100 bill and placed it on the counter. "Here," Lucia said softly, "for the baby." Victoria's humiliation reached its peak. Her face flushed red, her body trembling as she stared at the money. A fucking handout, like she was some charity case. Tears burned in her eyes. "I don't need your money," she choked out, her voice shaking with rage and shame. Lucia tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I know," she said simply, "but your baby does." Victoria wanted to die. Her hands curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms as she fought the urge to scream. Andrew gave her one last look, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. And then they left, just like that. Victoria stood there, the $100 bill staring back at her. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She had lost. And this was her punishment. It had been months since Victoria's world had come crashing down, but the pain was still raw. Every day felt like a battle, one she could never win. She had tried everything, begging, pleading. She had worked herself to the bone at that wretched grocery store, hoping for a sliver of redemption, some way to claw herself out of the hole she had dug. But nothing worked. Jason? He didn't even acknowledge her existence anymore. The child? Still growing inside her, but each day the thought of raising it alone filled her with dread. Her pride was gone, crushed under the weight of every failure. But there was one last thing she could try, one final card to play. She knew she was desperate, but she couldn't help it. Andrew was the only man she had ever truly loved. The man she had thrown away for a moment of weakness. She had betrayed him in the worst way, and now, standing at the crossroads of her misery, she realized she wanted more than anything for him to forgive her. But would he? It was an unassuming day. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. Victoria had tracked Andrew down, watching from a distance as he walked with Lucia, their hands intertwined like they had been for months now. Lucia, radiant and glowing with the love that Victoria had once shared with Andrew. Victoria felt a pang in her chest, her heart twisting at the sight. The life she could have had, the life she had thrown away. But she wasn't going to just watch from the sidelines anymore. With shaky hands, Victoria walked toward them, her breath shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew how this was going to go. She knew Andrew would see her coming and most likely dismiss her immediately. But something in her, that stubborn, desperate part, refused to let go. She had one last chance. "Andrew, wait," she called, her voice trembling as she took several steps forward. He froze. Lucia did too. Both of them turned around slowly, as if they had all the time in the world to deal with the mess Victoria had become. Andrew's face tightened. It had been months since they had last exchanged words. Months of watching him and Lucia thrive, while she had descended further into despair. "Victoria," he said with cold indifference, his voice flat and emotionless. "Please, just give me a moment," she begged, her eyes brimming with tears. She took another step forward, desperate. I've made mistakes, Andrew. I know I've hurt you, but please, I'm so sorry." Lucia stood a little behind Andrew, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She didn't speak, but her gaze was enough. It was the gaze of someone who had been burned by Victoria's actions and wasn't ready to forgive. Andrew looked at her, then back at Victoria. He sighed, his breath a sound of finality, and finally spoke. "You're right. You'd hurt me. But this isn't something I can just let go of. I know, Victoria whispered, feeling the weight of the truth. I know, but please, Andrew, please, I need you. You're the only one who can help me. I can't do this on my own. Andrew shook his head slowly. His jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his skin as he glanced down at Lucia, who gently placed a hand on his arm. They didn't need to speak to each other. They both knew what this was. I can't do this, Victoria. I can't go back to that, Andrew said, his voice low, yet somehow resolute. I've moved on. I found happiness. And you're just not part of that anymore. Lucia's lips twitched into a small, barely perceptible smile. She stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Victoria's shoulder, not in comfort, but more like a gesture of finality. He's right. You lost that chance, Victoria. You can't keep dragging him back into your mess. But Victoria was too far gone. Her hands trembled as she desperately tried to keep her composure. She couldn't stand there any longer, watching them walk away, watching her former life slip through her fingers. She paused, trying to choke back the tears. I made a huge mistake, and I don't know how to fix it, but please, please forgive me. There was a long silence, and for a brief moment, Victoria thought she saw something, just the faintest flicker of sympathy in Andrew's eyes. She grasped onto that hope like a lifeline. But then, Andrew reached into his coat pocket. He pulled something out, something small, thin and white. He held it out toward Victoria. A small envelope. For a moment, Victoria's heart skipped. Was this it? Was this his forgiveness? She reached out, her fingers brushing against the smooth paper. What is this? She whispered, her voice cracking. Open it, Andrew said, his tone now laced with something colder, sharper. With shaking hands, Victoria ripped open the envelope, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, she found a single piece of paper, a bill. She furrowed her brow. It was a receipt from their anniversary dinner. The night she had lost everything. It was the same night she had betrayed him. She blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was holding in her hands. Andrew leaned in, his face smirking, the same smirk that had haunted her since the moment she had realized her betrayal. I believe you still owe me for this, he said coolly, his voice dripping with finality. Victoria's mouth went dry. She could feel her world collapsing once more, the humiliation seeping into her very bones. You think this is funny? She whispered, her voice breaking. After everything, all the lies I've told, all the pain I caused, you're going to throw this in my face. Andrew didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, unwavering. No, Victoria, you threw it in my face. I'm just giving you a reminder of what it costs when you lose everything over a few selfish decisions. The price? Well, it's more than you could ever afford. He turned to Lucia, who had been silently watching the exchange, her expression unreadable. With one final glance at Victoria, Andrew turned on his heel. And without another word, they walked away, hand in hand, leaving Victoria standing there, her whole body shaking with the weight of rejection, the sting of betrayal, and the realization that she had truly lost it all.